Thank
Yeah.
you. Well, hi everybody. We are here on Anti-Bullying Day. So I just wanted to say first off, thank you for being here. We are so happy to see you all and your beautiful faces, taking time out of your days to join us and learn about seeds and how to build grow stations with your class. We are going to be hearing from Marcus Alab today. He's our community animator in the Capital Region in Victoria, and he's going to be teaching us all about some seeds growing and how to build shelves today. So I want everybody to take a second and think about the first time you held and grew your own seed. So you took that pot and you filled it with soil and you put a seed in and you watered it and you waited and waited and waited. And a few days later, something came up. And it's so joyous. That moment is so full of just, you're so proud of this tiny little baby plant. And I want to think about that feeling as we go into this to recreate that for our students and the people that we work with. We want to create that joy. We want to have honoring those plants coming to life and being able to be the source of that responsibility too that comes with it. So think about that feeling and think about that as we go into our presentation today. So a little bit about Farm to School BC. We are a provincial organization. We receive funding through the Ministry of Agriculture, Health. Sorry, I don't know why I said agriculture. We are administered by the Public Health Association of BC, and we are supported by the Province of British Columbia and the Provincial Health Services Authority. Since 2007, the Public Health Association of BC, PHABC, has administered Farm to School BC. It's a voluntary, nonprofit, non-government, member-driven organization which provides leadership to promote health, well-being, and social equity. So Farm to School BC, we have 3 pillars you can see on the left there: healthy local food, hands-on learning, and school and community connectedness. And we have 6 regions you can see on the map on the right there. We have 6 hubs throughout the province, and we have animators in each of them. So we provide grants to schools, and to date we have given grants to over 250 schools, well, over 300 schools, I guess now, with our most recent grants. Reaching hundreds of thousands of students across the province. So very exciting. Just some housekeeping before we get too far into the presentation. This webinar is recorded and will be posted on our website. So if you don't feel comfortable with your video, you don't need to use it, but we do love to see your face. We are going to be not saving questions for the end because it's kind of an in-depth webinar. We're going to be pausing kind of after different sections and allowing questions to happen then. And just because it is kind of a technical webinar, we're asking you to unmute yourself and say your question so you don't have to write it all out because it might be a little bit long. So if you do have a question, just write your name. So Dawn, you're just going to write Dawn in the chat box, and I'll kind of keep track. And then Marcus will check in after each section, and then you can ask something specific to that section. And then there'll also be a question period at the end. So we would love if you could unmute. If you don't feel comfortable with unmuting, you can just type your question, but we would like to hear you. Again, if you have further questions, Marcus will be available to answer anything. And you will receive the slides from the presentation, and you'll receive the recording. It'll be on our YouTube channel on Farm to School. So we have a little survey. We just want to get to know you and what you are doing. So if you could just have a look at the questions, let us know where you're from. If you're from BC, where in BC, what your role is, and what you hope to learn in this webinar. Can everybody see it okay? Marcus, can you tell me if the poll's okay? Thank you.
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah.
Thank you.
We're seeing some data entered. kind of like a little bit of a race when you watch it in real time. Go Kootenay!
Addie?
Yes.
I got that first question, but then it disappeared. And now how do I don't know how to access the second question. Sorry, I'm not
You know what? I just do the polls. I haven't actually participated in one, so I'm not sure. It's okay.
Can someone else maybe speak to how they moved from one to the other? Was there any little trick?
I use the scroll bar on the right-hand side if you mouse over the right-hand side of the window, but now it's disappeared. I'm not sure.
I'm on my iPad, so I don't seem to have.
Maybe if you hold, it's disappeared though.
It just,
okay.
I just want to get a. Doesn't matter. You don't need my statistics.
Thank you. So it looks like we've got people from all over BC, which is great. The island, the Lower Mainland, Interior Kootenays, and the Northwest. Lots of teachers, which is wonderful. Some admin, parents, guardian, community member, and other, which is always exciting. And everybody wants to know everything about seedlings, so that's wonderful. Wonderful. So I just want to tell you all a little bit about Marcus, because he's fabulous. He's our community animator in the Capital Region, and he's worked for over 10 years with school garden programs and establishing seedling projects in both elementary and middle schools. Since joining our team, he's also helped to coordinate the National Farm to School Conference, which was hosted in Victoria, and was an amazing conference and brought together people from all over North America for 3 days of learning and sharing. So I'm going to pass it over to him and let him get started. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Addie. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I guess in Zoom, I would prefer to be in person. I've never done this workshop specifically in this format, so it'll be a bit of an experiment. Really appreciate getting the feedback on that survey, actually, seeing the importance that was on activities. And so I do have some activities, some pretty basic kind of stuff to do with students, but and I will try to focus a little bit more on that and maybe leave that open a little bit for discussion. But I think that maybe what I might end up also doing is following up after, because a lot of the workshop focuses on the building of the station and the planting and the maintenance. And I do touch on resources, and I'll show you that as well. So I really appreciate getting that. So yeah, my name is Marcus Laub. I am with Farm to School BC as a Capital Region animator. I've also been coordinating the grants for this past year for the organization. I've been doing urban agriculture, schoolyard gardens for a little over 10 years now. My experience of the first time I planted a seed is interesting. When it was asked, I couldn't remember. And then the next thing I thought of was almost a metaphorical seed planting that happened in my own life. And it happened while living in Montreal. I started an urban agriculture training program based out of the university I was attending at the time, working with adults as a popular education program. We started having teachers from middle schools, high schools reaching out to us when they learned that we had started this on-campus kind of micro farm and market stand about coming out and visiting. So I said yes to a group, and it was middle schoolers, and they came out, and I gave them this tour. I really didn't have any idea of what I was doing, and I was a very novice gardener at the time, to be honest, and I was more interested in the education programming side of things, and partnered up with others who had a little bit more of those skills. When I was giving the tour, I was walking around with this group of, I think they were maybe grade 7, and they were boys, and they were pretty cool. They didn't think that walking around the garden was all that special at all. And so I brought them over to this one area where I knew we had some carrots that were ready to be harvested. And I said, hey, let's harvest these carrots, hoping that maybe that would get them excited. And the one kid, he pulled out the carrot, and it just so happened to be a substantially large carrot. And he pulled it out, and he went, oh my God, that blew my mind. And when he said it, I wasn't even looking at him, and I thought he was kidding. And when I turned and looked at him, he was holding it in front of his face, and And he was really, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And I said, what do you mean it blew your mind? And he goes, I didn't expect it. And that was like a really life-changing moment for me, because I realized in that moment when he was pulling on that green tuft at the top, he didn't have any clue that the carrot was underground. Like, he didn't know that pulling it was going to bring a carrot out. And in that moment, I realized just the impact that having kids engaging with gardens and outdoor education, especially in this urban setting in which I was living in, where a lot of these schoolyards didn't even have grass or any green spaces. I just realized that even just these soft experiences, like not even thinking about creating a large program around your garden, but just getting them out there to experience any stage of the growing process, was really vital, and it changed my direction of where I wanted to work with. I wanted to work with youth, and so yeah, that was like a seed planted in my mind, and then within a very short amount of time, I started working for a school district and helping design gardens and build gardens and offer curriculum and that kind of thing in school. So yeah, I just wanted to tell that story. It's one of the kind of big changing moments that happened for me, and it always sticks with me, and I also find it really funny. I wanted to offer a territorial acknowledgement for the area that I am currently living and working in, and so that is Lekwungen speaking territories of the Songhees and Esquimalt, so unceded territory in what is currently known as, I'm in Langford, so just outside of Victoria. So the presentation today is going to be broken up into sort of two presentations, and these were ones that I created in the past year, and I kind of brought them together, and I did a little bit of editing of them. But the first one is really about how to build the grow station. And just to say that, you know, I'm not a woodworker. I don't have any special skills at doing this, and that this station, which is very rudimentary, it's a very simple station. It was just something that you know, some 2x4s. It really does the job. It's very cheap, and why I went for this model was just because I wanted to figure out how to do it as affordable as possible, so I could get it in as many schools as possible based on budgets I was working with in the past. So you can do it any way you want, and the specs that I'm going to walk through are really, you know, just take it or leave it, but it's just some food for thought. So I will go into details around how to build it and some tips and stuff like that. And then the second half of the workshop, we'll go into more about the maintenance of it, activities with students, how to take care of them, materials, budget, and ending in a fundraiser. So I had some examples of raising seedlings in schools and then using it as a fundraiser to help actually fund part of the garden. And then obviously great to grow your own seedlings for your own garden, because it can save you a lot of money if you're typically buying your seedlings for your garden. It's just like a fraction of the cost, obviously. So that's kind of how it's going to be broken up into it. I definitely will do a pause after the first portion of the workshop, and then again at the end, and I might even pause in between, and then we'll look at what the list is of the different names there. So I'm going to get to it then. I'm going to share my screen. We've got a new model of how we can share it, so I'm going to try this out. How does that look? How does that look, Jen? Better than your rainbow, maybe? Okay, so it does work. Hallelujah. Okay, so we shall begin. This actually makes it a lot easier for me to be able to see myself at the same time. So, how to build a grow station webinar, hosted by Farm to School BC and PHA BC. So just right off the bat, that's the stations that I was building in a lot of schools. And you could fit, this is kind of a funny one because this was just in the basement, but you could fit 4 of these trays typically across, and that grows about a little over 70 seedlings to maturity. So just some items that we're going to touch on during the workshop. Okay, so this model here, it's 4-foot grow lights. It can take 4 of your typical trays you would find in any you know, grow station store, Home Hardware, wherever. That kind of thing, Home Depot, and it can grow 72 seedlings into the typical size of that you would buy a seedling at a store or at a farm stand, something like that. So that's what it's going to do, and we're going to talk about all of the steps and what the materials involved. So to build the station, it's about 2 hours. Planting seedlings, I you know, often will take up maybe 2 sessions with your class, maybe 1 to prep them and then 1 to do the actual planting. Or if you start with small seedlings and want to plant it up to the next bigger ones, that's what it will be. Really, it's about 5 minutes each day. I typically see teachers pick students that they trust to do that, but it's totally up to you. And it usually takes around 2 months to raise seedlings, depending on what you're growing. And we'll touch on that later. So this, I'm not going to go super into detail on this because we'll share this with you. But this is just basically the specs of what you would need. If you just showed up to a store, you could print this off and walk in and say, this is what I need to somebody. But it's 2x4s, 2 pieces of 8-foot length, you know, 2x2s, 2 pieces of 8-foot length, timer, that kind of thing. So this is just exactly what it is that you'll need. And so I just made that, and the budget is around $130 to $150. Very basic light timer, very important. You're going to want your lights on 16 hours a day. And there's another slide where it talks about that, but 16 hours a day is the amount that they prefer. I don't recommend planting in windowsills very much. It can work, but they can get pretty leggy, and that's why I make the case for the lights. It really makes for a stronger, more robust seedling, in my opinion. So when I talk about 2x4s and 2x2s, these are the cuts of wood that I'm referencing. Just very basic, nothing special, whatever you can find that's the cheapest thing. So shop lights. Also, this is just the very basic light you would see anywhere where there's just a fluorescent lights hanging. These are 4 foot in length. And why that's specifically perfect for this is because those 4 trays that I showed in that first picture side by side equal just about 4 feet too. So it actually works really perfectly to light those plants. You don't need any special bulb for raising seedlings. You can have a full spectrum if you want, but you don't really need that. If you were to grow the plants past a seedling stage and want to keep them alive long-term, yes, you would want to have different spectrums of lights. It's not something I have a lot of knowledge on, but I have done a lot of research on this component and read a lot of different threads on these kinds of things and determined that people said this is absolutely fine to start your seedlings. So I usually purchase 2 of these, and then you would need 4 bulbs in total. And they're T5. Hooks you'll need, and one just little detail that I wanted to point out here is that the hooks, whatever hook it is, it needs to be able to fit within the chain that comes with your lights there. So so just keep that in mind. What I did when I was in the stores, I just opened up the lights. I knew I was buying. I just grabbed the chain and just made sure it was the hook. But if you got it wrong, I mean, they're 25 cents or something. So tools needed. I have the list here, but I actually have some pictures of the tools needed that just help you with building it. So pretty basic stuff. Carpenter's ruler or a square, just to make sure you're getting lining up to make a straight cut. And you don't do very many cuts with this either. The reason why I chose those certain cuts of wood, which are 8 feet in length, because you can get 10 foot, you can get 12 foot. 8 feet typically can fit inside your car. You know, if you have a seat down and it kind of comes up to the front, it can fit in and it doesn't go out. And also it requires only one cut right in the middle. So that's very easy. You're just measuring right to the middle and then 1 cut. So it really simplifies the process. And there's more pictures of the grow station as we go through. A typical handsaw totally can do the job fine, but if you happen to have a saw on the right there, then that's great too, but you don't need it. A drill is very useful. You could do it by hand, but I would definitely recommend this. And the reason why the pre-drill bit is good is for you're kind of drilling near the edge of the wood and it causes splitting, but doing a little pre-drill and then drilling your screw in makes it so that the wood doesn't split. So it just makes it makes those points of contact stronger long term. So it's a little detail, but it actually does really help. And so that's the size you would want. 1/8 is the size you'd want. So you can really use any screws. Decking screws are very cheap. And because they're also, that's on the left there, my left anyways, they're coated in a little paint so that they don't rust. So you could go that way, or you could go just the ones that are there on the right. And then I just mentioned here, the Robertson bit is what you would use for the screws. So the square, that's what they typically are. Sometimes you'll see them be star. I don't know the actual names of them. That's not my forte, but yeah, just something to kind of keep in mind. And so these are just instructions related to it. And so this is more important, I think, for you as a takeaway. So we'll follow up with you. And if there's anyone out there, just to fully say that I know I'm moving through these slides, and there might be some of you who think, oh, this is an intimidating process, that you could absolutely follow up with me after, and I could help support that process or offer different pictures. If you were to bring this sort of information to anyone with even the most basic skills at building, they would do it in like 30 minutes and it would be over with. So just to say. So just a couple details about the building of the frame and the cross beams. So I just wanted to point out that you can see what's going on here. Very simple, very kind of crude and cheap building structure here. Is that you want the top beam to be on top of the post so that it's stronger. So the weight that's hanging off of this is being supported by the side beams, not the other way around where you're kind of drilling it in between the two. You want it on top like a lid kind of. That's important. It just makes it more structurally sound. And therefore you would do the exact same thing at the bottom down there. And then the cross beams are really, that's the 2x2s that I was talking about. And so I put them, just 2 of them across that hang the lights. And when you go to put them on, you would just measure it to try to make it as equal above the trays as possible. And I don't have the exact specifications, but it's just, you kind of eye it up and then you would do that. And I really just put 1 screw through on each, and that's all it is for the support beam. And then you got this chain link fence, the chain link chain here rather, that goes into the hooks. And it's nice when you have the hook that can fit in, is then you can raise and lower it as needed based on the site of how tall your seedlings are. So in the very beginning, you're going to have it really low. You want this is an important tip. I don't know if I already mentioned, I don't think I did, but you always want these lights to be about 6 inches from the plants. 6 inches from the plants. So you're going to be raising them as the plant grows. It doesn't have to be perfectly that, but that's what's kind of recommended. I'll just go back a slide. I didn't do this in the beginning, but I actually started doing it after. I actually started putting, you see those 2 beams down at the bottom? I ended up putting those across too, so that the trays were actually raised up. This way I could see if there was any water pooling underneath, which I do think is a good thing. You don't want it really pooling under the trays. So I did that, and then it gave a little bit of extra support too, and actually made it be much more sturdy. So that's a tip. And those pieces of wood are like $3, just so, very cheap. Yeah, I just wanted to point out a couple pictures about how many drills, screws I'm using, just 2 there. And then across, just showing that because the distance is over 4 feet actually in between the 2, when you do buy the 8-foot piece, it doesn't go all the way flush with the end. So if you're someone who wants to see it kind of perfectly flush and come all the way, then you would want to buy a larger piece to make sure it measures. I didn't worry about it because I just wanted to save money on the wood. So I bought only the 1 piece and cut it in half to bridge that 4 feet. So if you did want to make it come all the way to this edge right here, buy a 10-foot piece and just cut it so that it goes all the way. It looks a little nicer, to be honest. And if I were doing this a lot in schools now, I would just spend the extra money to do it, because it's really just peanuts really when it comes down to it.
Marcus, I'm just thinking, can this store, sometimes they can cut wood for you?
Yeah, so good. That's a really good thing to bring up. Yeah, every time I have given a workshop on this, somebody brings that up and I'm always like, yes, I forgot. So yeah, you can take this in actually to them and just ask them to do it. And then you don't have to worry about that step at all. So, and it's very cheap. So I would highly recommend it if you do have that option at one of your hardware stores. Just ask them to do it. I think they charge something like $1 or something per cut, or 50 cents per cut, and you would only be doing like 5 or 8 cuts or whatever it is. So yeah, I would highly recommend going that. And then you're ready to go, and then you don't even have to worry about saw.
Also, Marcus, talking about cutting things, I mean, I come from a high school, but every elementary has a high school in the neighborhood, and they have a wood shop. So
right, yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, and if you've got a good connection with a woodworking coworker or a teacher, and you can bring it to them, I mean, you could just expand this in a whole other way. And I do have some other pictures where, when I was in Montreal, we had a larger budget for some projects, and I actually enlisted some of my carpenter friends to build these these like double-decker ones with like slide outs and all this. And I'm pretty sure I have pictures of them, but yeah, you can really expand into all different, much more, you know, interesting ideas. This is kind of, I always show this one because it's like, here's something you can do with $150, you know, and get going. But yeah, certainly if you brought this to woodworking, they could really take it and run with it. I guess I was just pointing out when you don't do the pre-drill, it cracks the wood there, but it's not a really big deal. It's only really a big deal when you're really assembling and disassembling it a lot. It can start to weaken a little bit, but otherwise it's not a big deal. But it's just, I just want to show the example and then just kind of show a close-up of how the wood doesn't come all the way flush again, but we already talked about that. Just showing again at the bottom, when I do these cross beams at the bottom, which is totally optional, I bring them and I put them right there in the corner, and it just adds a little bit of extra stability to that corner. And then it's also good spacing for the tray itself, so that the tray isn't really like leaning off to either side or slumping too much. So just an example of the seedlings growing. The popsicle sticks are in there. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. Really important though is to be labeling each and every cell. And so I just wanted, because this is a good picture right here, I am going to come and talk about it in a little bit, but you kind of have two different options when doing planting with the kids. And one is that you can essentially provide them with, you know, maybe a pair or an individual student with a section of these cells. They come often in like, it's hard to tell there, but they often come in little mini packets of 6 or 9 that make up the whole flat of trays. So you can either have them pair up and plant, or you could skip this stage and actually get them to plant in the next bigger pot up, which is called potting up. For those of you who are not, I don't have much of a gardening background there. You usually start in this size cell, and it's usually in there for about, you know, 3 weeks to 4 weeks. And then you take it from that cell and you put it in the next larger cell, which is called potting up. And that next larger cell is those 4-inch typical ones. And you'll see some pictures of them, but they're the ones that you would buy at a seedling sale, as I mentioned earlier. However, you could just go straight into the bigger cell to skip that step. So that could save you time. I just find that they can be sometimes a little bit more finicky in the germination stage. But that is definitely an option. So, but the one benefit about is that some plants don't really need to actually go from these small, I think they're 1.5 inch or whatever the size is, these cells to the next bigger ones, such as lettuces. They can actually go from this size straight to the ground. So that's just a tip, is that like often what I do when I have my garden going is I'll just start a whole tray of lettuce of this size. And when it's about a month or 5 weeks later, I just take it from this to the ground. But in this picture, I see nasturtiums, I see some peppers. If these would all need to go in the next stage and spend another 4 or so weeks maturing and filling out there before they'd be ready to grow, because they will outgrow this cell in pretty short order. So one way that you can be looking to see if it's time to pot them up into the next size one, I say that 4-week timeline, but is to pull them up and look underneath. And if you see the roots are starting to grow out, then that is a sign. And another sign is feel free to go and kind of squish around the bottom of one of the plastic cells and just really lightly tug, especially when they're dry. It's much easier to do this when they're dry. Don't try to do it when they're wet, but squeeze the bottom of it a little bit. It won't hurt the plant, and tug right at the base where it reaches the ground and pull up and see, are the roots looking like a big web around there and all crossing over each other? And if they are, it's time to get them into the next pot. So that's just kind of a little tip there. Maybe I just want to pause just for 1 second here, because there's been a lot of information in and around that, and I will come to more of the planting tips later. Do we have any questions on the list at this moment, Adi? No, we're good? Okay.
Oh, but if anybody has any that they want to share, you can unmute yourself. And certainly, yeah. Sharing is also welcome. Oh, Jackie's wondering, how did you start this? Start which? This tray? The planting? How did I start the planting? Jackie, I'm going to come unmute yourself and you can. Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself to ask. Yeah, I started them right in those trays with seeds. Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to talk about it in the next portion of the presentation a little bit more about how to do that. But yeah, I made a seedling
starter substrate, which you just buy at the store. I put it in the tray and I planted seeds and started watering. Really, really basic. But I'll talk about that once I get through the building kind of stage. Mounting lights. One of the only things to think about that's really an important note is to try as much as you can to mount the, like what I would do is, if I were you, is I would lay the light down actually flat across here, and you want to try to get the chain to be as directly underneath the hook as you can. Otherwise it does this kind of bowing thing off to the side. So that's just something to think about. Lay down the light first, raise the chain, see where it would go, and that's where you put the hook. Don't put the hook in first, because sometimes you'll do that and you'll actually find that you can't get it straight. So I've done that when I first started. So just a little kind of tip is to kind of like line it up with they have these little holes in the actual thing that you hook it in, and the other end of this has got a little hook on it. So. We already saw that slide. I think that was a duplicate. Oh, just a close up of where you can hook in there. So you can also, if you ever lose this is actually one that I did lose. So it comes with a hook, but I lost my hook that goes in there. And you see how these are kind of closed off like an 8. I just took pliers and I opened it up and it was the same thing. So if you ever lose your hook, don't worry about it. You can just take a little needle nose pliers and do it, or somebody with very calloused fingers can also do it for you. Yeah, just another picture here of them growing. This is kind of the stage where you're maybe about 3 weeks in at this point, just kind of giving you an idea of where seedlings. So they're not quite ready, but they're getting closer. Sunflower, right, is that one there on the right. I can tell by the bottom of it there, and those grow really fast. So that's not really exactly how everything is growing. Okay, and that's it for the first portion. So I'm going to stop my sharing. So we have some comments or questions there that are, do you want to, I can't.
Yeah, people have just been saying that wood has gone up a lot lately in price. And Shalay said that she got some steel shelf on wheels that was on sale, and it fits 4-foot lights. And then got some discounted. So what are the differences between the different materials? Like, is steel, plastic, wood? Like, do you have any feedback for how they?
Yeah, I mean, steel tend to be quite a bit more expensive, but you can find deals out there and you can kind of change it up. Like one of the ones that you'll see a lot actually is those kind of just really typical aluminum kind of, maybe it's steel shelving units that are in shops or even in schools sometimes. Those can actually be really useful too. And they're great because, yeah, there's no rusting of it. The wood isn't ever going to wear down. I haven't really had much experience of the wood. You know, it's not like there's not that much pressure or anything on it. So I have seen both examples. Typically when I go online and look at models, they can be quite expensive. Obviously, it's a business. And a lot of times they'll have small lights. They'll only have 2-foot lights. Yeah, that was my experience there. We see, I just picked up an adjustable shelving at Costco today for $29. So that's really good. Maybe if you have a link there, you should put it in the chat box so people can maybe copy that. Okay. So yeah, feel free to keep adding comments. Now I'm going to move on to more of the hands-on component of raising the seedlings, activities with the students, etc. Okay. Okay, so here's the materials I recommend using for starting your seedlings in a classroom. So I recommend choosing organic seedling mix. It is more expensive, but you know what you're dealing with. And typically a bag that you'll purchase for doing a project like this will be around $15. It is cheaper to go and buy the larger bags. So ProMix is the one that I've used a bunch, but there's other ones. It doesn't matter about the brand. Really, it's just kind of, you're looking for bags that have, it's good to have perlite and vermiculite in it. They sometimes only have one or the other. It's usually perlite that's in it. And that's really good for keeping the soil substrate fluffy and not making it too compacted. So just look for that. And so ProMix is one, and there's a few others. And I mean, they're everywhere, and you can't really go wrong as long as you're getting a seedling starter mix. The other aspect of the seedling mix, so you kind of are creating a blend, and I recommend using compost, fine compost, or worm castings that are composted. Worm castings are great because it's very fine and there's no chunky bits in it. So sometimes you'll notice that the compost bags, they have a lot of chunky bits. Well, that's kind of a nightmare for starting seedlings, in fact, because you might have this chunk of wood right directly underneath the seed that you don't notice, and then the seed won't be able to grow around it. So worm castings are more expensive. You don't need to go that route, but they're really, it's the highest quality of compost pretty much that you can get. So that's sort of there, and I'll talk about what the actual blend is. So I learned this from a woman who studied at the Botanical Gardens in Montreal. She came and she trained us all on seedling management. We grew 10,000 seedlings a year in our greenhouse for the general public. And this was basically hers, was that it was 3 parts seedling mix, generic, and 1 part compost. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And if you didn't have compost, I've grown them without, and they still do okay. They just seem a little less happy. So you want to get a kind of a large tote. You kind of just got to eye it a little bit based on how much you're going to be growing. Like if you got 4 trays, just kind of take a look at it and just guess and dump it in. And you can always keep it for later. Although one thing to keep in mind, if you are going to keep it for later, don't put the lid on tight. Crack the lid a little bit so that it can kind of dry itself out. Otherwise, it will mold once the water and the compost are in there. So the seedling mix itself won't, but the compost does bring in bacteria, so it will mold. So if you do have leftover, just kind of leave the lid open and aerate it a bit. And then once it's dry again, you can cover it up. So you want to mix it in a large bin. I use, like I mentioned, Rubbermaid, Tupperwares, that kind of thing. And you want to add in water, a few cups at a time. And what we're looking for is you to be able to grab a handful of it, squeeze it tightly in your hand, and be able to open your hand, and it holds its form without rapidly dripping water. So if you were to squeeze it hard in your hand and you saw like 1 or 2 drops, perfect. If you squeezed it hard in your hand, it didn't drip, and you opened your hand and it was still holding its form, that's perfect. And this is absolutely necessary when starting seedling mixtures, because otherwise it won't, what's the word I'm looking for? It won't take on the water, essentially. There's a better word. I studied geography. I can't believe I don't know it. Otherwise, when you go to water it, it actually will all the soil will just go flying out. It won't absorb. Oh my goodness. Yeah, so you've got to do this step. And it's kind of a fun step, and you can get kids involved in this step if you want. But I mean, it's really, you're probably not gonna be able to involve the whole classroom, but this is kind of an ideal thing if you've got some keener students who want to get in there and have fun. When I've done workshops, I typically do it before, because otherwise they spend the whole session with them washing their hands. So filling trays. So as I mentioned, one of the trays that you see in the bottom right there typically holds 72. So that's 72 cells. So very important detail. You're going to be starting one of these trays that will then be potted up into 4 of the 4-inch trays. So just a little point of detail. So one of these trays ends up turning into 4 trays with the 4-inch cells. It's the exact amount, which is really unique and awesome, but that's how it works. And so just to keep in mind, when you would be starting your seedlings in the beginning, you would be using just one of these trays, and then down the road, when you look to pot up into the bigger trays, that's when you end up with 4 trays. So in the beginning, you're really just starting 1. I'm not a big fan of paper or egg cartons when doing this. I know that it's not great to be bringing more plastic into the world, but I find that they dry out really, really fast. If you can somehow manage to be on top of it, go for it. But egg cartons, to me, are too shallow, for one thing, and they dry out because they're always wicking, whereas the plastic holds it. And this is a big important part, the germination stage, especially if you ever land on a long weekend. These are the times where your plants really can dry out. And so another thing to keep in mind is that there's trays, like the under trays. This is kind of the cell tray, but then you have the tray that it holds it in, and they come with holes and without. So just to be mindful of that, I recommend the ones without holes, because otherwise, if the students are overwatering, there's always water going through onto the table. However, when you go with the option of the no holes, you have to be careful, because they can also, when they overwater, it can be pooling in there, and then you got these roots that are now trying to get out because they want the water, and that's not good either. So it's like this fine balance, and it really is just kind of, I trust each teacher to kind of take it in their own way. So maybe I see a bunch of a few questions in here. Oh, just one so far. Are there seedlings that are better grown in bigger trays because they dislike transplanting? Yes, all the squash, zucchini, cucumber, they go straight. They go straight to the 4-inch, not the little ones. Yeah, that's a great question. Basil go to the small ones first. Pretty much everything else go to the small ones, but any of the ones that are in that squash family, they go straight to the big ones. That's a great question, because it is one of the plants I recommend growing with students. And just to say, you know, we're talking about indoor growing to get a jump on the season and to have a greening of the classroom. That's sort of the goal and the fun part of doing this. But you can also directly sow seeds right into the ground. That's totally an option. This is just for greening of the classroom, maybe starting a seedling fundraiser, that kind of thing. Okay, so when filling the trays, I just really dump the soil all along the top of it here. I move my hand across the top of the tray. I'm not pushing in or compressing it. And a little trick I like to do is actually raise the tray up off of the table a couple inches and drop it. And that does this really nice compressing. And then I keep adding soil, and you want it really level right across the top, but you don't want to push down. You don't need to compact it. I wish we were doing this in person so I could be showing you this step.
That was a good visual.
Okay, great.
Especially with your head right over the tray, you can kind of see
nice. Okay, whatever time are we at here? 4:15. Okay, I better get moving here. On the right there is these kinds of fancy dancy ones that we were doing with my carpenter friends, and they were great. They slid out, two double stacked. I had a whole compartment section in the bottom there. Labor and materials probably around $700 to $1,000. So it could be the kind of thing that a carpentry class could do on maybe be around a $200 budget for wood. So just keep that in mind if you ever did want to go this sort of route. That there's these models out there. So very important is labeling your trays first, name and date planted. I actually talk a little bit. I want to kind of move through this because I talk about it more in detail of how to do it with the students. But you can use yogurt. I cut up yogurt containers sometimes and write on it. If you're going to use any plastic labeling, you have to use a permanent marker, and even better is the oil-based permanent marker, because otherwise all the watering really does wash it off, and then you don't know what you planted. And this was especially important when you're doing a seedling sale where you want to know what plant is what. Like if you have cherry tomatoes and Roma tomatoes, you can't tell at that point. So, but popsicle sticks are also great and that kind of thing. So, so what to plant? So it really depends entirely on your goals. Maybe you want to start a pollinator garden or a pumpkin patch, or maybe a pizza garden with tomatoes and basil. Or maybe you want to grow greens for a salad bar program. For seedling sales, popular items are tomato, peppers, squash, zucchini, lettuce, cucumber, and flowers. So, I mean, these are also popular just to do in a class in general. But as it relates to if you're ever looking to maybe have fun and do a little bit of a sale here and trying to treat it a bit as a fundraising goal, like we want to pay for our compost and our seeds each year. These are ones that I found success. I see someone saying herbs. Herbs are as well too. Those work well. Yeah, basil is a good one. Some herbs you need to start earlier. So just keep that in mind. We talk a little bit about that chart here in a second, but you do need to start some herbs a little bit earlier, but that's no big deal, but just to keep in mind. Same with flowers. So sometimes they require early planting and a unique substrate. So not the same mixture here, like some like to be grown in more of a sandy substrate. So you would have to, if you were gonna try to grow some quote exotic type flower, you might have to get some sand and put that in the mixture. So that would maybe be an advanced kind of attack for this kind of project. So when to plant. So a lot of this is based on last frost typically, and it depends on when you want to harvest. So you want to note the date to maturity, but typically you want to aim for late May, especially if you're thinking of a seedling sale. And that kind of goes for most regions, but it's really based on when you think that most of the stuff can get in the ground. Of course, you know, lettuce can go in the ground and kale can grow in the ground earlier than tomatoes. But when it comes to maybe doing a seedling sale, you just got to pick a day and kind of go with it. And that needs to be based around more of the warm loving plants. So I wanted to just show a crop planting template that we actually have created. So just let me stop my sharing here. And I'm gonna come, let me see here. So yeah, so actually Addie worked on this. Can you see that? Does the crop planting tool show up? Yes? Yep. Okay, great. So this is on our website. If you go under, is it under resources, Addie? Is that correct? Under resources? I think it is. So
yeah, curriculum resources, and then it's its own.
Right. I meant to show the main page. I can maybe show in a second, but this is a great resource that we just created. So it talks a lot about just tips about planting, including the difference between starting seeds and transplants, season extension, the terminology, like how to read a pack of seeds, and what it means when it says dates to maturity, and what it means when it says indoor sowing, and all these different details. So this is on our website. And then if you see down here at the bottom, we've got all these tabs, and this is for the different regions. So we actually did this research in with partnerships of organizations and farmers in the different regions to identify, along with West Coast Seeds, to identify the best times to be doing these. And so it's still a work in progress, and certainly there'll be changes to this and it will be edited, but it's pretty good. I've been looking through it. I was reviewing my area. So this is a pretty great tool. And so I don't need to get too into it, but just to say that this is on our website. Maybe I can show.
Just to say with that too, that we've skewed the dates so that it's harvested around the school year. So we're trying to minimize July and August harvest dates. So things are kind of, they look a little funny if you're gardening at home. Like my tomatoes, it has a really late planting date, for example, so that they're more ready in September, October than August. So
yeah, that's a really good point too. I just wanted to show the website. So there's a drop down here and the crop planning is there, and then the food literacy resources are here. And so I was going to show this in a minute, but I'll just kind of show it right here. So there's some good resources on here that can really much further elaborate on the stuff I'm talking about right now, because Addie's put a lot of time into this. So yeah, here's a bunch of different links here that you can go and find resources after this workshop. So,
is there anything, do we want to have some questions? Oh, you got budgets? Okay. If anybody has questions, you just feel free to write your name if you want to unmute, or just be writing in the chat. We've got a couple more minutes. Okay. And then just before we wrap up, I just want to let everybody know about our next webinar.
Perfect. So how to plant with students. I mean, it really depends on age. I recommend larger seeds with younger students, you know, beets, sunflowers, beans, peas. I also recommend maybe doing a trial planting, one that they maybe just take it home so that they get used to it. And so leading into a session with some talks about seeds, and maybe even having a time where you just show them seeds leading up to it and how they're so different in size. So to prep in advance, I like to divide them among students often in pairs and have them pick what seeds they want to plant before the day so that you can kind of prep it and get it ready. Keep the amount of options typically fairly low, but that's really up to you as a teacher or an educator. And consider planting directly into 4-inch pots with the younger children, as I mentioned before. Popsicle sticks do work, but when you do use them, you have to use pencil because the pen does bleed. So if you're gonna get them to plant, you have to do that. And so I also get them to put their initials on the back so that they know which is their plant. So once that they've sat down, one of the first things that I have them do is write on the sticks what their plant is and their name, and they get all their sticks ready. Then I bring the tray over to them they're gonna plant into, and the first thing I ask them to do is put the sticks into the tray. Otherwise it can get really confusing. After that, I ask them to use the back of their pencil, put a little depression in, only of a couple centimeters, half an inch, that kind of thing. I switched it here, but I want the labels in. It can go either way. And then I want them to plant one by one. And why I want them to plant one by one, which is impossible to get them to do, is so that they don't end up planting multiple in the same one and forget, because sometimes the seeds are small and dark. So if they plant it in one hole and cover it, then they know they're done with that one. So, but you could go any route that makes the most sense to you, but that's what I usually do, is get them to do kind of one. If they have multiple, I get them to do that. And I have done things where I just go around and hand out the seeds individually. It takes a fair amount of time, but if you're prepared in advance, you can do that, but I leave that up to teachers to decide that kind of process. You do want to water immediately on the day of, and then you're going to be watering every day, once a day, and I talk more about this in a second. I typically do it in the morning, but also recommend an afternoon watering on Fridays so that you can get through that weekend. So I mentioned the resources that are on our website, but some of the ones that I just want to recommend is really around observation and measurements, like treating it a little bit like it's a race for the plants, which ones grow the fastest, which ones emerge the first and germinate first, and maybe starting a chart where they're ticking off and you're seeing how different plants grow at different paces, who has the first 2 leaves. Really simple stuff like that I like to do with younger students, and when it gets more advanced, then you can really just start looking along in our website and different spots for ways to connect it to the curriculum. I also like to encourage off-season experimentation. I've been talking a lot about typically, starting in the spring with the idea that you're going to grow in the fall and then it's all done. But you can use the grow station all times of the year to do different experiments. And so some of the fun ones are, what is it like if we only water the plants every other day? Or what happens if we put a few of the seedlings over to the side 5 feet away from the tray? And what if we put 5 seeds in this one? How does it change over time? So really simple stuff like that is the stuff I like. And I also, just for those who maybe are on the call here who don't feel overly confident in their growing skills, is just to treat it like it's fun to just have plants growing in your classroom and have the kids engaged around them, and then they take them home. There's really a lot of ways that you can do this that don't have to be this kind of seedling fundraiser and all kinds of in-depth curriculum connections, but there are plenty of opportunities online if you do go that route. Yes, I mentioned before, 16 hours a day, 6 inches above. I like to move the trays around, just kind of flip them into different spots, because sometimes the ones on the outside are leaning in a bit. So kind of move them around once a week. Germination. So all of the seeds are going to germinate at a different amount of time, but usually it's within about 3 to 10 days. So, if you don't see anything by around 2 weeks, that it might mean that something went wrong and you might want to start over, just to say. That's not for every seed, and herbs and flowers sometimes take longer, so keep that in mind. I just wanted to show this picture of the lid on top. So this lid is wonderful for long weekends in the very beginning stages. It doesn't really apply once the plants get larger, but it can really save your seedlings. Like if you plant and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize it's a 3-day weekend, you would want these. It would be really useful if you can't get into the school to water them. Yeah, and so it's a daily watering, and I use a spritzer, and I'll show a picture of that. But if you do it before a March break or something, you really do have to take it home. Love these little spritzer ones here. They're pump action. And the way that I set up a watering structure with the students is I actually I'm watering the plants, and what you want to see is that by the next morning, they're pretty much dried out, but not entirely dry. And sometimes I'll just pick up the tray to feel if there's any moisture weight there. But these little things are great because they do this kind of mist spraying here. They're only usually about $5 to $10 at the store. Sometimes the Dollarama stores have them for only $3. They work good. And what I often do is I actually determine, I'll water the plants and see what is the right amount. And then I just take a marker or a piece of tape and I put it on the actual container itself and tell them that they need to fill up to that spot and empty it in their watering. And I'm moving that tape up as you require more and more watering. I think this is very useful. Another thing is counting, is having them count a certain amount while doing it, but you know how they sometimes speed count, and so who knows. But that's what I do there. So there's just some other tips there. But you can do it with a lot of other things like little ones, but you're not gonna wanna have like a water spout at this stage, especially when they're little. You want spritzing. Example of overwatering. This isn't gonna kill the plants or anything. You can scrape this off the surface. It's just an algae and the plants will be fine, but that's your typical sign that you need to back off on how much you're watering. overwatering, you just look in the bottom of the tray the next day before you water. And if you see water in there, then that's how you know you're overwatering. And then underwatering is anytime you see the leaves being limp the next morning. That means you might want to move up the tape. I'm not going to go into potting up. It's just due to time, but there's lots of information online where you can check that out. Just talking about moving it into larger pots and the benefits of that. Instead of in ground, you can totally go that route.
Marie's just wondering how long seeds last.
Yeah, so I've had seeds where I've gotten them to work after even 4 years, 5 years, but they kind of go down in their germination kind of percentage or whatever each year by you know, anywhere from 10 to maybe 20%. Is what I see, but I think usually 3 years you're absolutely still fine. But I often will start planting two per cell when I get into that kind of 3 years, 4 years, and it usually is fine. But some seeds like tomatoes sometimes don't really do well, but other seeds do. So just a budget here for what it looks like to do a startup, around 250. So it'd be a little bit more. We're hearing that the wood costs are more. So, and a seedling sale. So one of these stations could at $3 per would generate around $210 in sales. I would usually line them up with an event where teachers and parents were intermingling. We would do a little newsletter that would go out, have them do a pre-order, or not even go that route and just simply set up the seedlings out front of a school on the day of and let, you know, as people come and go, they pick them up. It's whatever kind of works best for you. This is how I did it at a school one time. We had a really active pack and they reached out and we had them all pre-sold, and then they just kind of picked them up on the day of, and we sold like 150 seedlings. It was really great. And that's it for my presentation. I know we're right at 4:30 right now. Does anyone have any questions? And I can stay on for a few extra minutes too as well. But I know Addie also has one.
Just have a grumpy baby. Shalay, did you want to add something? I see you wrote your name.
Sorry, I had to jump up and answer the door, keep my dog from barking. But I missed the beginning of the germination part. I came back as you were talking about different sort of observation things and activities and whatnot. And one thing that we've done with school programs, which is really fun, is pre-germination in moist paper towel in a baggie. And then the kids watch daily as to, you know, the roots starting to sprout out, and then taking sort of notes on how long it took to germinate. And then you can actually, some seeds, the bigger ones, you can take and actually then plant into, as you were explaining, into all the cells and whatnot. But that was a really quick and easy way to get the kids really engaged, because they actually saw it growing before their eyes, as opposed to waiting for just the green to come out, which was really fun.
Nice. Yeah, those are great.
Jennifer, did you want to go?
Hi, Marcus. Just a couple of questions. One about about the timer. So what's the difference between 16 and 18? Do you have any kind of advice or thoughts on that? Because 18 is also thrown out there as an ideal number for growing hours in a day.
Yeah, sure. I think that's, yeah, either one. I've always done 16 and it's worked fine, but I don't think it's going to hurt it to go more. The only thing you have to watch out for is in the early stages is the lights do create warmth and they can dry out the plant. So you just got to kind of keep a little bit of an eye on that. So the more time might dry it out quicker. That's the only thing I could see.
Okay, for sure. And then I have kind of a gardener question, and I would invite anyone to chime in on it. But we're looking to do some microgreens. So we've actually got permission from every single teacher in our school that wants to grow at Fairview. So we're super excited. And we've got 8 carts right now. We're going to have 9 in total, and they're going to share it as a cohort. So there'll be 3 weeks in one class, and then they'll go to the other cohort. But we're hoping to do a tray of microgreens and then another tray of seedlings. We have 2 shelves to work with lights. And I can't seem to source the microgreens. West Coast Seed has the supply that I'm looking for, but it's like $17 for a $25 bag, like $17 in shipping. So do you have any advice on where I might be able to get these peas? I want to grow microgreen peas.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest ones in the western part of Canada is Mums. They're a famous one. That's not.
They offer discounts to schools as well. If you get it shipped right to your school, they'll give you 20% off or something. So good.
Yeah. So I see a question from Vanessa. So what I wanted to say is that, like, when you start in your typical tray that has the 72, that when potted up equals 4 trays of the 4-inch full, so that your whole station would then be filled with 4 trays packed tight. It turns out to be 18 of the next size up cells. And when you go to the store, they're actually in a connected flat. You can rip them apart, but they come all together and they fit perfectly in. So you would go to the store and say, I need 4 flats of the 18, you know, those cells, and you could count them out. And then you know that your one tray of 72 is going to then go and become 4 trays of that. That's how it works kind of perfectly. Yeah. But you could also just start 4 trays of the 72 of lettuce and just plant lettuce if you wanted to go that route. So
I think Marie had a question too, if you want to unmute yourself, Marie.
Yeah, actually, that was my question. So you just answered it. Where to go from the 72 seedlings to the next stage up was, so you just answered that. 1 tray of 72 seedlings goes to 4 trays of 18, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Excellent.
18 is the number, yeah.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any other questions before we finish up? Okay. I just wanted to share, you already know all about Marcus. Our next webinar is on March 10th, the Wednesday. We're going to be doing, it's kind of part 2 of the seedlings. It's learning about soil, and how to prepare the soil for crops, and then specific gardening issues. So it should be really helpful. It's more for outdoor garden. So if you have a garden outside in your classroom, we would love it if you wanted to come to this one as well. And always, you can go back to our website, connect with your regional animator in the part of the province that you're in. And we have regional listservs that you can sign up for regional specific updates. As well, we have a monthly newsletter and all of our social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So thank you all so much for coming. We hope that you got lots of information. And I think all of those like little tips that you just like said offhand, Marcus, I've taken years to learn them. So I'm gonna make sure that I add all of those to my arsenal of knowledge. So thank you all so much.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Good luck this year with growing.
Thanks, Addie and Marcus. It was awesome.
Thank you.